Good morning, everyone. My name is Louise Smith, and I am an improvement coordinator at the LGA, working on our local government reorganisation and devolution support offer. I am really pleased to be here hosting this LGA virtual event this morning, where you're going to hear more about children's and adult services in relation to local government reorganisation. We know that this is a challenging area. There are both risks to be mitigated there, as well as opportunities that we can exploit. So over the next hour and a quarter, we're going to talk about some of those risks and opportunities and think about some of the key enablers of success. It's not our intention today to go into really detailed service delivery issues, but rather to have a look at the key themes and strategic issues for you to consider to help you make sure that you've got a context in which children's and adult services can start really strong under your new councils. Before I introduce the session and the speakers, I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping points. If you'd like to ask a question, we are using the Q&A tab for that today. So please pop your questions in the Q&A and upvote any of the questions that you'd particularly like to see our speakers answer. We are recording the presentation and panel discussion sections of today's webinar. They'll be hosted on the LGA's website after the webinar is finished. The Q&A section at the end isn't going to be recorded, but we will be publishing a note of that at the end as well on the website. You can enable live captions for today's webinar by going to the top of your screen. There should be some more buttons at the top there. If you click into language and speech and then show live captions, you'll be able to get your live captions to go through today. And finally, this event is part of our improvement sector support programme, which is funded by the UK government. So we're going to start today's session with a bit of context setting by Rachel Shimmin, who is Chief Executive at Buckinghamshire Council. We're then going to have a panel discussion, which Rachel will join alongside Milorad Vasic, who is Director of Children's Services at Westmoreland and Furness Council, and Jonathan Price, who is Executive Director of People Adult Services at Dorset Council. We're then going to have some time at the end for questions, as I mentioned. So thank you very much to everybody for joining us. I'm going to hand straight over to Rachel for her introductory presentation. Thank you, Rachel.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Louise. And great to have a chance to talk to people about experience of unitarisation. So just a few words to start with in relation to my background in unitarisation for those colleagues who are not familiar with me and the roles that I've done before. And why should you be, in fact? So I have formerly been in my career both a Director of Children's Services and a Director of Adult Services, as well as regional chairs for those two functions in terms of linking in with ADAS and ADCS. I am currently the Chief Executive of Buckinghamshire, and in addition, I'm on the advisory group which MHCLG are running on unitarisation. I am the lead Chief Executive for the County Council Network, and as such have regular conversations with Trevor, who is my opposite number in the District Councils Network, and I'm involved in a range of different national forums in relation to speaking on behalf of the sector. For the purpose of our conversation today, though, I've got the, is it a pleasure, is it a curse, who knows, of going through unitarisation twice, would you believe? So having done it in Durham, where we had 8 councils into one, I then went on to do it in Buckinghamshire, glutton for punishment and all of that, in which we were 5 different councils into one. So not a disaggregation, but an aggregation of different functions. As well as going through those processes, though, of course, I've been alongside colleagues who have disaggregated, and we've got some colleagues with us today who have been in that position from a children and adults perspective. So really brilliant to hear their experience. You might be happy to know that I've not got a load of slides to go through with you. I'm just going to talk to you about some of the things I think it's worth looking out for as you go through this journey. The first thing I want to say to you is I want to share a number with you, and the number I want to share with you is 23 million. That is the number of our residents who are going to be directly affected by this massive round of unitarisation. We've never, ever done it on this scale as a country before. It's a real first, and it's going to get choppy and it's going to get wobbly because of the sheer scale of the unitarisation, alongside, as you know, a number of our councils also jumping into a combined authority. But 23 million people are relying on us to get this right. No pressure, no pressure. The other thing that I would suggest to you is that if you are going into this conversation and into this new world with some very clear opinions on what should and shouldn't be in children's services, I would suggest that you hold steady, you suspend your judgment for a bit, and you allow yourselves to think through some of the really tricky issues that exist in both of those massive service areas. Between them, they generally comprise of over 65% of expenditure for any unitary council and more in upper tier world, in county council world. So the temptation will be to run at it thinking, actually, we can push down all these costs and it'll all be all right and there won't be a crisis in local government finance. My view is that that is absolutely untrue. The spend is very significant for a very particular reason, and that is the statutory nature of those services. Now, you may or may not agree with what I'm going to say in this presentation, and that's absolutely fine, but I'm going to give you my perception based on experience of unitarisation on 2 occasions and being a chief executive of the 5th biggest unitary council in the country. Now, when we unitarised, our children's services was in intervention, so it had got 2 inadequate ratings in Ofsted, and we had a commissioner and an improvement board, and managing and juggling that improvement journey alongside delivering business as usual, because, you know, our residents still needed their services, as yours will, and going through the unitarisation process is really tough. And my very, very strong opinion is that although it's tempting to get into lots of lovely conversations about how services will improve and be better, and they will be able to improve and be better post-unitarisation, the job at hand in this part of the process is to safely land everything. And as part of doing that, understanding what those services do and some of the questions to ask yourselves in order to get your knowledge base to be as enhanced and as sophisticated as it could be, I think is the job. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus in on some of the big ticket issues that I think apply to these services to try and hopefully help you navigate what you most need to know. So on that basis, let's kick off. So first of all, partnership, absolutely critical across all of our functions, whatever we do, whether we're an upper tier, a lower tier, a unitary council, we don't do anything on our own, do we? So in this world, you know, I think there are a series of statutory partnerships, and I think the questions to ask are, what are those partnerships? Why do they exist? What do we think the nature of them are? Who goes to them? And what's their output? So in this world, we'll have safeguarding partnerships, and there have been some changes in the law in relation to the way the children's one works with the role of the independent scrutineer. That's a new development. We've got safeguarding adults partnerships, which are absolutely critical. Ask yourself what the role of health is on those partnerships with the changes to the ICB. The world has got much more complicated now with the ICB changes, and our colleagues in health have got their eyes on their reorganisation. Well, what does that mean to the statutory partnerships? How active a role are they playing? Are we challenging them to do their statutory functions? What's the role of scrutiny in relation to those partnerships? What about community safety partnerships and their overlap with vulnerable people? Where are they? And what about health and wellbeing partnerships, which are a formal committee of the council? How are they working now? In a district world, do all of the districts sit on those, or do you have a nominated person? You know, what is the interface across all of the districts and how are they working? So partnerships, absolutely critical. Workforce planning, similarly. In children's and adults in different parts of the country, there are different rates of interim temporary staff. They are expensive. They involve turnover for children and adults. What is the situation in your place? And why is it so? So in our place here, at our high, I think in my time here, we had a 37% interim rate for children's services. That is really tough in terms of managing service quality. And it's a downward spiral. So if you're inadequate in Ofsted terms, it's much harder to recruit people at the very time you need them. So what's the situation in your place in relation to workforce? What is the approach to workforce planning? How much money is being spent on agency staff? And that's not a criticism necessarily, because the bottom line is our upper tier councils have to make sure that they've got cover for casework. So they will have to spend that money on agency staff, and it is very difficult in some places to get permanent staff in. But what is the approach to workforce planning? Does your place have golden hellos? Do they have handcuffs for people to encourage them to stay? Because sometimes there's a bit of an arms race for staff in social work where one council will pay more than another. And across the country at various points in time, we've tried to have agreements in place so that we don't do that to one another. Well, what's the situation in your place? Is that a live agreement? What's the approach to overseas recruitment? Are you doing it? Are you not? Again, many of us over time have gone to places like Canada, Australia, sometimes some non-speaking English countries to try and recruit people and bring them over. If you're doing that, what are the lessons learned? How have you done that differently? We did it once here. There were some mistakes we made. When we did it a second time, we had to change our whole approach. Where are you in your place on that kind of recruitment? Do you have an academy model? So some places will have a kind of cadet scheme or an apprenticeship scheme or a partnership with local colleges so that they've got a pipeline of people coming through. Ditto on management pipeline. What is the management pipeline in these services? Because like anything else, it's not the case for most of us, is it, that one day we're operationally brilliant at something and the next day we're a super manager having had no training or development. So what are the approaches to training and development of managers? And overall, what's the approach to staff engagement? What are the engagement scores like? What are the sickness levels like? These two services are really heavy end in terms of impact on people. And the changes that unitrisation presents will make people feel unsteady and unstable. It'll be happening across the workforce more broadly. In these two particular wings of what we do functionally, we absolutely cannot afford to start hemorrhaging people. You cannot afford to start seeing a 10% drift away from your upper tier council because people are worried about unitrisation. And the directors of adults and directors of children are going to have to work really hard to keep people steady because it is not in the interest of your 23 million residents to suddenly have a massive gap in people who are very competent and able in relation to running these services. Moving then to casework. So colleagues who work in district councils will be familiar with casework in things like temporary accommodation, housing related services, and so on. It is of critical importance in children and adults to understand the approach to casework because casework makes a difference between people being safe, reaching their potential, getting great services, and the council failing individuals or families. In Buckinghamshire, we're still requires improvement on casework in children's, although we're good in CQC terms in adults. So it is something that we're constantly striving for, and none of us rest on our laurels, including councils that are outstanding, because if you take your foot off the gas in relation to casework quality, you very quickly drift out. And start to do the wrong things. So questions to ask yourself in this area are things like, are there particular practice methodologies that are used in children and adults? What are they? Do children's services use family group conferencing? Do adult services use the 3 conversation model? So just becoming familiar with how those services work is really important. And it may be that colleagues are already doing a bit of show and tell for one another. So, in district councils, are you doing a bit of show and tell to the county on what some of your functionality looks like? Are adults and children doing the same so that you've got a real sense in your place of how it actually works? How are the voice of service users represented in casework? What's the oversight and supervision look like? What are the key metrics and data sets that you need to understand in order to feel confident about casework? And what are the processes of escalation when things go wrong up through organisation? So the chief executive, the lead elected member, the leader of the council. The LGA produce a really good guide, particularly in children's services world, on what you need to know on children's services. It's really, really helpful. It's available on the LGA website, and I would encourage people to have a look at that just to feel that you feel confident about the questions to ask. On provision and market oversight, so in adult services in particular, we work with a market. We work with the free market. It's often private equity backed. It's really important to think through in children's and adults, what are the make or buy decisions? So in adult services, generally, we've bought in because residential care in particular is more cost effective bought in. It allows more choice for people. It allows plurality. In children's services, we've seen them swing back, haven't we, from market purchase because bluntly PE-backed organisations have whacked up costs to a level that is astronomical, eye-watering, and is causing us all to bust the budget. So we are bringing back in-house more now children's homes. I would be very, very surprised if that was ever going to be cost-effective in the adults world. Our adults colleagues might have a different view. But in our children's world, we are doing much more building of children's homes, converting of children's homes to oversee quality, ensure children are nearer to their social workers and families and networks, and also to make sure that the cost comes down. So what is the strategy in your place? What is the strategy in your place for if providers fail? Is there enough plurality? Have you got enough adult services provision? Have you got enough home care provision? Have you got enough free nursing care? Have you got enough continuing health care? Have you got enough domiciliary care for children's services? Do you know that? And what will happen is that in upper tier councils, they will have sufficiency statements for children's, adults, and special educational need, which of course is a critical aspect of all our work. What do those sufficiency statements look like? Where are the gaps? And when we start thinking about future state, and I would very strongly encourage you again not to go down this path too soon because you need to land your unitary, but in the future state, what is the additionality of having a single unitary council in terms of the housing provision or your asset base that you could use either to support schools in relation to SEND or in relation to step down provision for adults who might be coming out of hospital or to stop them going into hospital, or for your children's home. So, you'll suddenly have access to a much wider asset base. What is the approach in your place to care leavers and housing? Another sweet spot for post-unitarisation, because we know that care leavers need significant support to reach their potential as they leave the system. Housing plays a really, really fundamental part in that. And then on service development and improvement work, it would be catastrophic if two-tier councils at the minute stopped doing service improvement and development just because of unitarisation. Catastrophic. You see, as I see, every blooming week, there's another policy initiative. There's another ask of local government. I can't remember ever seeing them come so thick and fast. Can you? So whether it's extended producer responsibility, renters' rights, whether it's that massive change in children's world, biggest set of reforms I think we've seen in children's for 25 years, whether it's neighbourhood health teams, whether it's the NHS 10-year plan, and on and on and on. Local plan, we mustn't forget local plan, massive gig, massive gig. So let us not pretend that unitarisation is the only gig in town. We have 23 million people who are saying to us, actually, what are you doing on all this other stuff, councils? So it's critically important that both our district colleagues and our county colleagues continue to do the reforms. We cannot just stand and say, actually, we won't bother with any of this stuff because in X years' time, and it will be years before you go live for most of you, we'll make it all work. We can't do that. We've got to keep working on this stuff now. So perhaps ask yourself the question, how can I contribute, whether I'm a county or a district, in thinking about how those reforms are being implemented? Because implemented they will be, and they will be the implementation responsibility of the districts if they apply to district statutory functions, or the county if they apply to county district functions. But have at the front of your mind, you've got 23 million people relying on you to get this right together. How can you pull that water uphill in a way that is going to get the best outcome for people, whichever tier are responsible in this interim period? Because the world isn't stopping for local government reorganisation, and we absolutely will need to get on the bus together. On communication and engagement, I think very important to think about what already exists in children and adult services. All children and adults will have a load of engagement mechanisms with groups of special interest. It might be looked after children, it might be parents of children with SEND, it might be people who are learning disabled, it might be groups of older people, but they will exist. And if you're a district council, they'll already be happening in your places. You will also, as district councils, have engagement mechanisms. You might want to have those conversations early with your county colleagues about whether you might want to collapse them down. I think that is a sweet spot actually during this transition period, because one of the things that happens, and it will happen more and more the closer you get, is people get, understandably, really anxious about what the future looks like, and partners get anxious. So, whether it's a chief constable or a chief fire officer or the chief executive of the health service or town and parish councils, people get really worried about what does all this stuff mean for me, particularly given the combined authority overlay. So people get anxious enough when it's just unitarising, but when there's another layer, people are going to really need to understand what that means for them. And what none of us want is for people to stop thinking about operational delivery because of this noise up here. Because those 23 million people don't care about this noise up here. They're just bothered about the operational delivery. So it's worth thinking about, where's the map of engagement forums that exist in children and adult services, but I would also suggest in district council services, so that you together can look at the map of your place and what your engagement looks like. You're going to need to do a lot of reassurance for people on continuity. So, I've had many conversations over the years with colleagues about, but Rachel, what's the point in us reorganising our police force areas? Because you'll only do something different. And my view is always, you do what's right for your functionality, and we'll do what's right for ours, because in another few years, it'll all be up in there again. Nowhere more so than the world of the NHS, of course, which reorganises, if they're lucky, every 3 years, more frequently, often as not. Town and parish is really important in this space, because town and parish councils don't generally have very significant interface with the sharp end of children and adults, by which I mean protection. But of course, they do have a really significant impact and interface with more general universal services. So I think it's really worth thinking through, when you're going down a unitarisation road, how are you interfacing with town and parishes in a way that is meaningful, but doesn't try and service every single town and parish with lots of detail on an individual basis. We made that mistake here. We had 160 plus. We tried to have engagement conversations with them all individually. We could never service that in a meaningful way. So that was definitely a bit of learning for us. But also, what about inspectors, regulators, schools, colleges, nurseries, service providers? What's the engagement with those groups during unitarisation, and how does that interface work generally? If you're not sure about that, again, something that's important to understand, I think, as you go down this journey together. And then enablers. So the money really matters, right? So without the money being okay, we're all sunk. Again, what we mustn't do is take our foot off the gas of managing the budget, because if the upper tiers do that, you'll sink the new unitary. If district councils do that, you'll create massive holes going forward. So where are we in these big service areas on managing the money? What do the overspends look like if they occur? What are the savings plans and targets? Can colleagues in district councils do more together to try and push down on demand and spend? Because we know that this is the biggest chunk of the budget. What's the role of the schools forum in relation to money? This is particularly critical when it comes to the high needs block in special educational needs. And if we want to have a bit more time together on high needs block, we can pick that up in Q&A. But this is something that will sink local government if it doesn't get resolved. The government have to deal with the SEND high needs block provision, because at the minute, most of us are running up a massive overdraft that we've got no real way of paying off. So we've got to pay attention to that high needs block. What is your place's approach to continuing healthcare spend? So this is money that the NHS are responsible for funding, that they often struggle to want to pay. We've got to make sure in local government that the NHS pay for CHC for people, that's continuing healthcare, where their needs meet that trigger, because A, the person does not have to sell their houses or pay for care themselves if it's CHC, and B, neither do we in local government, so we can spend our resources on the things that we are legally responsible for. So do you understand what the CHC gig is in your place? Do you understand what it means? Because it is really critical for your budget. What is your demographic model in telling you also about your place? Because whichever configuration of unitarisation you get to, you need to think long and hard about your demographic trend. So a risk of breaking up existing counties may be that what you do is you end up with a very high dependency ratio, which is people who are older in need of services, and far less people who are of working age and are going to contribute more to your tax base. So you need to understand, when you're doing your modelling about what you think best to put into government, what that is going to mean for your income as a unitary council going forward. And what does the future look like for you also in terms of your housing numbers? What's that going to do to your dependency ratio? What's it going to do to your number of children and your requests for school places? So have you got a really good business intelligence framework that you're using in your places to really understand that? And where's your IT in all of that? Where are your systems? You're going to have IT contracts in place that you can't just cancel, right? So you're going to limp along for a bit post-unitarisation with some of your IT, but you'll need to really think that through. And finally, from me, what you're trying to do at the minute is give as strong a foundation as you possibly can for your people to build better, more cost-effective services for the future. But it is a hard gig getting there. It is hard miles, and you've just got to keep on keeping on. I'll stop there, Louise, and we'll see where we get to next. Hope that's helpful for people.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And you finished absolutely bang on time. Not your first rodeo, I think. Thank you so much. So much food for thought in there. Really, really helpful. Just a reminder to colleagues that we are recording the session. There was obviously loads of really helpful stuff in Rachel's presentation there, so you will be able to go back and pick things out if you want. We will now move on to our panel session. I'm first going to come to our additional speakers to ask them to introduce themselves before we move into the questions. So, Jonathan, can I come to you and ask you to introduce yourself and your experience with local government reorganisation, please?
Yeah, thank you, Louise. Hard to follow Rachel, isn't it? So yeah, I'm John Price. I'm the Exec Director for Dorset Council for Adults, Health and Housing Services. We were part of the LGR exercise that went live April 2019, which created both Dorset Council and BCP Council. So two sort of rural, coastal, urban settings created a population in Dorset Council of about 380. We are the more rural side of things, so a dispersed population. My background really is obviously in Dorset, prior to that in Cornwall. So I've had the pleasure of joining organisations after LGR, so really into that second phase of development. And I think that's an important point that comes through in Rachel's discussion really about, it doesn't stop. It's very much a continued journey. So, we are very much into that second phase of the journey in Dorset Council at the moment. And then prior to that, I was in the London boroughs for many years before moving to the southwest. I'm part of ADAS, that play a key leadership role in digital and workforce across the region. And I think that's another key point. We do work regionally, as adult social care and children's services, but also what we have retained very much through this LGR exercise is a good relationship with BCP Council. So there's a lot of joint working and some joint services still that remain across the two. So that's my introduction. Thanks, Louise.
Thanks very much, John. And Milorad, can I come over to you for an introduction, please?
Oh, hello. Thank you for using my Sunday name. I feel appropriately formal. So Milorad Vasic, I'm the Director of Children's Services in Westmoreland and Furness, but everyone just calls me Mill, just makes life easier. Welcome everybody, and thanks again for letting me speak today. So Westmoreland and Furness Council, probably not many people know where it is, but they know where Cumbria is, I'm hoping. And Westmoreland and Furness covers what is basically the southern part of Cumbria. So it stretches from Barrow in Furness, which you might well have seen in the news because it's had a lot of prominence with the nuclear submarines, etc. And that's an area of relative deprivation. And we go all the way to the west and north to Alston, which is the highest village in England, and it's the second largest local authority, but the fifth densely populated. So we've got a mixture of, we've got 3 district councils as was into one area. And vesting day was April 2023. I joined in July of that year, and since that time, I suppose I've been able to see the immediate after effects of LGR, if you like, and some of the lessons learned from that, but also actually what an opportunity it is. I mean, it's frightening when you look about everything that Rachel sets out, which was, I was making notes myself and I just thought, oh yeah, I've done that, so that's all right. But I felt it was a really well put together presentation. But it is an opportunity, and I think part of the role we've had since that point is to set the mood music for the organisation, despite all those issues you need to look at and consider, and we can talk a bit more about those over the session. But as leaders, there's something there about your ambition and aspiration for the place that needs to come through whilst you deal with the plumbing, if you like, of reorganisation, whatever that looks like in your area. And I think Rachel's really salient point is keep focusing on the residents, the children, young people, for me, as DCS, and I've done the adults role as well and the people director, which I felt was maybe a bit too big, but anyway, happy to be focused on children. But those decisions you make sure they're right for those individuals and don't get lost or taken on the crest of that particular wave of, well, we're doing LGR, I'm all really busy, because that really is maybe a recipe to let things slip. So that focus on doing what's right for the individuals and the people that you serve needs to be paramount whilst you try and navigate some of the complexities of reorganisation and also integration as well. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Bill. Really appreciated. Okay, so we're going to go into a few questions now, quite open-ended questions. So hopefully give everybody an opportunity to really think about all of your different experiences. You obviously all come from very different areas, different points at the reorganisation process that you've come in and so on. So a chance to explore some of those. And just a reminder to everybody on the call, we do have the Q&A tab ready for our Q&A session at the end as well, if you want to pop anything in there. So the first question I'm going to bring to all of you is actually about the challenges that were faced. So what were the biggest challenges in relation to children and adult services through reorganisation and immediately after reorganisation? And in particular, in thinking about those things, what do you think you got right in your local authority and through your reorganisation process? And what would you do differently if you were to do it again? So can I come to you first, Rachel, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. So what we did on both occasions, actually in Durham and in Buckinghamshire, is we worked really hard to try and get the balance between the adults and children's directors being part of the transition process so that we'd have the interface with our district colleagues. And both in the adults world, the adults director co-chaired with one of our district leads, one of our boards that sat underneath the overarching implementation board that I chaired. That was a really good model. We didn't do that with children's services in Buckinghamshire, and the reason for that was that we were in intervention, and we'd agreed with our commissioner MHCLG that effectively there had to be a bit of a ring around children's services so that they weren't pushed off their improvement journey. That was a real mixed blessing. And of course, what it meant, and the risk is in children's and adults, I think, that children and adults often risk not feeling part of the organisation. Doesn't matter whether it's unitary or upper tier. There's a real risk always that because of the nature of the work, they look down, and in doing so, they don't think about the wider opportunities afforded by being part of a bigger place-based organisation. I don't think that matters whether you're unitary or not. And so we've worked very hard post-unitarisation so that all of our staff across every department see themselves as part of the place. And so we do quite a lot of work on cross-cutting leadership, where I'll ask, the service director for children's social care to lead on something that's got absolutely nothing to do with her portfolio, to get her out of that silo and into something else. And I do it the other way on. So I've got our service director who's responsible for highways, co-chairing a group on leaving care, for instance, because that really helps embed in the organisation a shared understanding of the business and why we're here, and to try and avoid people feeling like they're in real silos and that they're dug in. But I do think that balance is really hard during the transition to unitary, because what none of us want are for any of our service areas to start failing because people haven't got their eyes on the function that they need to have, and it is really tricky.
Thanks, Rachel. John, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, so I think, certainly for this LGR, it's going back some time, which I wasn't here for, but from what I can see and what I'd expect, it was very much a focus on our people, our residents, and certainly that has been something that's carried all the way through since then. So the challenge of a kind of almost a lift and shift from the County Council of Adults and Children's Services safely, I think is not to be underestimated. I think that in itself is step one. For us here, obviously the pandemic hit very quickly afterwards, so you know, we were able to react in an appropriate way to that, and again, you know, ensure safety. We were lucky to have retained a public health function that went across both DC and BCP Council at the time. That really underpinned that period of time. So I think those were our sort of challenges. But you know, I think what I would say in terms of, you know, cultural integration, you know, is something that you constantly need to keep an eye on. I think we did really well here by sort of setting out for a new organisation, and this is the opportunity as well, you know, a new organisation, those cultural values, you know, and the ways of working, and you know, that has been sort of the story post pandemic of how the council as a whole works to those values. So not a done piece of work, lots more to do, as you'd expect, but certainly that underpinning. The workforce uncertainty, I think, is quite key. We were lucky here in retaining the senior management team for the majority of that first term. So we have all, you know, changed roles recently, but a lot of that has been people stepping up. So I think getting that workforce continuity right is really key, and a key challenge if you don't. And people, you know, did fear for their jobs. You know, that's evidence now. I think in the second stage really of you know, transformation of a whole council, you know, that bubbles back up. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment, you know, to work more as one council instead of like the separate bits. You know, that sort of uncertainty is still there, I would say. So there's something about, you know, how you work that through, and once you start that change, how you don't stop, because in a way stopping creates worse conditions. So I think there's something about maintaining that continuity of change, you know, ensuring, as Rachel said, you know, that you keep your staffing levels good. You know, we've been really clear to invest in both children's and adult services in Dorset, and you know, we benefit from that. We have very good services here, a very good market for care, which you know, it probably stands out in the southwest. So there's lots of things there, but I think, you know, keeping your eye on that investment on the frontline services in the broadest sense is really important. And you know, looking really at that sort of decision making, I think go live is one step, and then how do you evolve your governance, you know, as a new organisation is the next step, and again, that doesn't stop. So I think those were sort of like the key areas of challenge for us really here.
Thanks, John, really helpful. And over to you, please, Mill.
That was an easy question to start, I thought. There's maybe several areas I'll talk about. Some of this is kind of obvious and straightforward, and some of it maybe not, and I'll maybe emphasize where some of this needs to sit. And I suppose there's the obvious stuff around program management, and you'll have all of that. There'll be Gantt charts and this, that, and it's incredibly complicated, or it can be. But I think there's something around how you make decisions and governance, as boring as those words are, on linking that to your members as well, and the other composite parts of that, because staff, partners, residents, many don't get what this is all about, and neither should they. But they do want to understand what is happening and when it is happening. I think that goes back to some of that business as usual, safe and legal, but you need to be able to make decisions and not spend forever about it, because it's a time limited process. And it is a time, I think, where partners and others will come together and be friendly and work with you, so long as you share and be open with them. So I think that's important in terms of being clear about how you make decisions. I think the other bit is getting a good team around you with the right knowledge and expertise in that program group. So some of it will be people with program management skills, but it'd be really helpful if, particularly if you're around the children's aspect, if you've got someone who knows something about children's, because it's just fraught with complexity and opportunity to fail and risk all over the place. But also, I think that there's that bit. I think people and partnerships, I think it's been mentioned. Staff well-being is key, morale, honest communications. But if you can start to show and think about their development through this process as well. So we did a huge piece of work which we continued afterwards. Well, we did loads of staff roadshows all the time, going to different areas, and like I said, it's a big geographical area to cover. So we were doing 3 road shows. We've continued doing this with the staff, questions and answers, all those sorts of things. But there was something about, it's about that mood music and the benefit, which is something around setting that culture, is what is the new place going to be about? And it isn't a half of something or an addition or an accretion of other districts together. It has to go back to this single narrative and purpose of the benefits. And if staff are involved at that all the time and the message is repeated, and then they can, some of them, we decided towards the end and as I joined to focus on middle management development. So not like, you get senior executive coaching and we all do various stuff. But we did that individually with our middle managers right across the piece, because children's service isn't just children's social care. There's family help, there's education, there's schools, there's school transport, there's admissions, there's school organisation, there's finance. It's a business in and of its own right. And even in a unitary, those bits don't necessarily integrate as one anyway. So it is an opportunity maybe to fix some of those things perhaps. So I think that we've talked about partners and those partnerships and how those might work. I think the other fear is county services, children's and adults, as Rachel said, are massive and districts are not, both in terms of budget, staff. And what we found is a lot of district staff felt, and then depending on who ends up in the senior roles, can feel like it could be a bit of a takeover, or it's all about the county and there. And there's a lot to be said for the districts linked with communities and what they understand and how they deliver services. So not trying to manage some of those tensions and being alert to them and facing them up open and honestly, I think is there. I think service continuity, quality, we've mentioned some of that already. There are opportunities to harmonise service models, etc., as you go forward. And you do have to have a view of what the next state is going to be like and thinking about where you might want to end up. But you can't rush to that point, and that's where some of that program management comes in. And I'll say where we maybe got some of this wrong in where we were, or would have done differently. And then whilst we focus on the plumbing, I think John mentioned it just now, is the culture piece. And what does it mean to be this new entity? And that's about members. It is all about values, but it's also about how you engage with staff and the visibility of that culture. It's not just saying, "Oh, this is our culture. Here's a bunch of values that we've got off ChatGPT that work and or whatever," and mixed it around a bit. It is about engaging. It's very tiring, but really, really rewarding. And one of the most pleasing things that we've seen, well, us in children's and CQC report will be out shortly, is that actually staff, people, partners, schools have said it's got better since LGR, and staff have said the culture's different and we're not lost in this huge area that was in the past Cumbria. Both us and Cumberland have progressed children's services, which was stubbornly RI up to good, and some aspects that are improving beyond that. So I think this focus on culture and that actual definition and vision of how you do that and that visibility of leaders is important. That's why it's who you get doing some of the operational stuff is really important. The other, what didn't, or in terms of things to be wary of, everything that you put to say, all right, that's really complex, we'll deal with that later. Some of that will come back and bite you on the proverbial afterwards. And some of the things you need to really consider and how you're going to focus in on that is a lot of stuff around the enabler service stuff that Rachel's talked about, but particularly around IT and the complexity of those systems, because there'll be district stuff with district planning, district this, district that, the other, and we all have signage everywhere, but you can't unravel some of the hosted IT arrangements, and that feels fragmented. And as we progress, it becomes even more complicated to unravel. And as a result, that identity of a single entity and single decision making and clarity is a frustration to staff and also to residents. So that some of those things that you want to do later, just be mindful of what those might be.
Thank you very much. And I've certainly heard the IT point from many places that have been through LGR kind of saying, my God, the IT was a nightmare, but worth getting on everyone's radars. Fab. So on to our next question around, and we've touched on this a little bit in some of your answers already, which is great, but what were the benefits of local government reorganisation on children and adult services? So again, we'll start with Rachel, please.
I think they're massive benefits because I suppose my view has always been people don't live in service structures or organisational structures, they live in places. And therefore, their needs and their wants and their potential isn't in any way going to fit with what happens to be a bureaucratic structure. And that applies, of course, even if you're unitary, which is why you absolutely work in partnership with people, communities and other organisations. So I think there are enormous benefits because you've got the levers as an organisation across into other partners. It's simpler to do that when you're one organisation. You've got bilateral relationships that they're just more, it's much more complicated in the two-tier world. There are some really practical things though as well, aren't there? So I touched earlier on the housing example. So, if I think about the property portfolio we've got now, we've got access to all sorts of buildings that we have repurposed, for instance, to temporary accommodation that the district councils wouldn't have access to because they would have been owned by the county. And I think it's unlikely that the county would have just given those over for TA. We've got accommodation that we are using for care leavers. We've got accommodation that we are repurposing into step down accommodation for hospitals. So housing's a really great example, but so is leisure, So how do you use your relationship with leisure providers differently? How do you use a relationship with business differently? So for instance, how do you work with your business organisations, for example, so that your residents in your most deprived areas get a foot on the ladder to build confidence and experience by doing work placements or apprenticeships prior to applying for jobs? That's much easier when as a whole organisation, you can look at your cohort, you can look at your data, and you can understand where you target. We've got a programme here called Opportunity Books, which is focused on our 10 most deprived wards, and we've used all our data to look at the metrics. And what that tells us is, unlike the traditional thinking about Buckinghamshire being long gravel drives and everybody dripping in riches, in our 10 most deprived wards, the outcomes actually are the same as they were for people in County Durham, which is one of the most deprived places in the country, sadly still remains so. So we're doing loads of targeted intervention there. So things like winter warmth initiatives, really targeting an individual and street level because we know who those people are. Work on making every adult matter and understanding who our frequent flyers are in homelessness. So we had one man, for instance, who was living under an underpass on the M40. He'd been living there for years in very rich Buckinghamshire. We were able to intervene with him. He's now in residential stable accommodation for the first time, in many, many, many years for him. But also examples like, our foster care recruitment campaign. We met with our foster carers. We had a group of colleagues from across different services in the organisation in a workshop with foster carers. We workshopped what was most valuable to them. The top two areas were council tax reduction. So if you're a foster carer now in Buckinghamshire, you don't pay your council tax. We pay it for you because you're supporting our kids. And would you believe bigger bins? Because the bin was a major issue for foster carers. And we had in the room with us a wonderful woman called Rebecca Newbert, who runs the waste service in the north and manages the contract in the south. And she just said straight away, I can make that happen next week. And she did. So again, it's the lever bit, isn't it? You know, what are you there for your residents? How do you make stuff happen in a quicker, easier, less transactional, but more meaningful way? So 100%, despite all the blooming pain, and it is painful, this bit, it's definitely worth it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel. John.
Yes, I think, you know, it's difficult to measure, isn't it? But I would say better services. So I think, you know, what you achieve through this is a big toolbox. So, you know, in children's and adults, you know, we can work with all of those services that transfer in. We've got better partnerships as a result of that. We have, you know, better reach in our community. So I think all of that engenders much better services to your residents. And, you know, we're just about to be CQC'd, so fingers crossed, you know, that is the verdict there. But certainly in our children's space, you know, we're outstanding. So, you know, these things are, you know, possible, I think, by bringing together and increasing that, you know, toolbox that you have as a unitary authority. I think, you know, part of that touched on the leadership continuity. I think one of the things we got right here was we had the structure right. So we had, you know, housing with people services. Rachel's touched on that. I mean, massive opportunities there, you know, and we've really stepped forward in that space here in Dorset, accommodation with care for children and adults. So, you know, I think these are the opportunities that are opened up, and you know, having a kind of like a good structure to start with, having your public health at the senior team level is really important. And I think to Mel's point, really a little bit, you know, not having double headers. You know, I think you need, in places such as you know, ours, you need dedicated specialist DAS and DCS, and that's certainly worked. And we never have that conversation here about could you do double header, because it just isn't possible. You know, there are two really key services, but we're getting that right. I think what we start to see through our work, you know, from this longer period is our ability to prevent, you know, and how we're able to work much better at a community level, resident level, around prevention. So I think, again, that toolbox sort of plays through. And then the final point, really, I would say is the sort of power of an integrated commissioner. So, you know, having that kind of a bigger sort of pull over the market more generally, you know, having a bigger sort of stake in all relationships is one that's beneficial to you when you're looking ultimately to get, you know, high quality value for money services. So I think those are all key. A little bit about sort of when, you know, we came through this, what I can see is really strong data came through the initial phase, and that has allowed us really to underpin the development of, you know, our market position across lots of services, and again, you know, make the most of those opportunities in partnership. So I think, you know, don't lose sight of what you're creating through this is actually a picture of a new range of opportunities at service level that comes from that. So I think that's really good. But yeah, ultimately, you know, better services.
So yeah, excellent point to end on. Thank you. And Mel, over to you, please.
I've got 3 words for you, really. I think the benefits: collaboration. I think those have been touched on. Innovation, some of the things you can do differently. And one that is actually quite important, and that's and it didn't begin with a C, unfortunately. I've been racking my brain while Jonathan was talking. Was accountability. You've got, you know, you've got a clear democratic mandate with your members. You've got a clear senior management team who are responsible for the totality of how the place works. Not necessarily responsible in you own everything, because the partnership bits is really important. But in that space, you've got more influence with the other strategic bodies that determine what happens in a place, whether that's the ICBs, which, you know, we won't go into. That's another meeting, I think, another webinar. But same with the police, fire, and the other elected members. If you end up in a mayoral authority, a unitary provides a unified advocate for the residents of the place that you're responsible for, which I don't necessarily think you can get when you have so many different tiers of government. So I would say that would be it, without repeating points.
No, that's great. Thank you. That's great. We've now started having some questions come through in our Q&A. So I'm going to skip my final question for you as a panel and move straight on to the Q&A so that we can get through some of those. So the first question that we had come through was about, have the experiences in Dorset, Buckinghamshire or Cumbria